Chorus Voices, the podcast brought to you by Chorus, a fresh approach to community service. Settle in, listen in, and enjoy the voices who bring you reflections, musings, and stories from our community.
So welcome to this episode of Chorus Voices. I'm CEO Dan Minchin.
And I'm Louise Forster.
So it's good to see you, Lou. Today we're going to do something a little bit different and talk a bit more about ourselves and what motivates us in work. So it's a pretty something that I guess a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to get to the bottom of, feeling a sense of satisfaction at work.
So I think I probably hear from more people who are not motivated at work, and probably reflect to myself that I can't empathise with them because I've usually been very motivated in my work. I did have a conversation actually with one of our colleagues at Chorus when it dawned on her that a role that she was in was not motivating her, and there was about 5 different things that she listed off that she would usually have, and they'd changed, and that was her kind of trigger to say, this job is not motivating me.
Yeah, that's a great sort of self-reflection by that person. And work is work, right? So you do it for a reason. There's usually a financial or family reason why you do it. But I certainly have always had the philosophy that you should do work that you find meaningful. And I'd like to think that everybody in Chorus gets the opportunity to do work that they find meaningful. It's not going to be perfect every day, but if we can have it on average, people feel like this is really purposeful work, then that's a great place to be. So the way we're going to approach this is have a bit of a chat about our own journeys of work and getting to this point. And so we're kind of interviewing each other, which is a little bit self-indulgent, but hopefully people find it interesting. So Lou, if you had to outline your career path to here and working at Chorus, what would that look like?
I think I thought to myself I won't work in community services because I kind of grew up in a family that offered respite care to kids with disabilities, and my mum worked in this sector, I guess, probably the equivalent of home and community care, what we do a lot of at Chorus. So I grew up thinking I definitely don't want to do what my mum did.
You tried as hard as you could.
I did. I tried to move away from it, but it's so funny how life just brings you back sometimes. So I studied anthropology and thought about doing business studies earlier, but didn't. I ended up doing an MBA more recently. But I think I really enjoyed work experience when I was about 14, and that was in this kind of sector. And then probably the crux was moving to Australia in my early 20s. I had done some other work, including working at a couple of banks. So that was probably me trying to not work.
And you even came as far away as Australia from the UK to try and escape your destiny.
Yeah, exactly. But it didn't work because I got here and realised that it was more convenient, easier to find a job and probably better paid for me to work in disability services than it was to do bar work, which is bar or fruit picking, isn't it? A couple of traditional backpacking roles. And I remember one of my first interviews, the guy said, and you've got a degree, so we'll have to pay you on the highest pay bracket. And I was like, even more of a bonus, and penalty rates and things like that. So I just ended up falling into that in Australia. But I did have a little stint in scuba diving, running a business and instructing, teaching people how to dive. But then fell back again.
But even there, you're about as far away as you could get, but even there you ended up in this kind of domain.
Yeah, and I did the qualification to teach people with a disability how to dive as well. So it kind of kept coming. It's a bit like the sticks trying to find water. They just kept coming back together again.
I think your fate was sealed.
Yeah, I think so.
So what happened next?
So ended up managing some houses in the community for people with disability that lived in those houses.
And this is in Perth?
In Sydney, that was, and had some great opportunities. One of the houses was up for an external audit and was predicted to fail miserably, and so I got thrown in with a few weeks' notice to try and have us pass, and we did with flying colours, and that was good fun. Pretty much lived at that house for a month or so to get that ready, and worked with the manager, who was quite young at the time. I was young too, but she was younger than me, and to get her picking that house back up and running with it afterwards. And she ended up being motivated to do her midwifery course, and kind of still really in touch with her online.
Fantastic.
And then got married in 2005, came over to Perth and have had and worked about 4 organisations in Perth. And until recently at Chorus, I have been in more business-to-business organisations. So it's quite nice to finally go full circle and be back in an organisation that has direct impact on people in the community.
Yeah, my sort of reflection on that is, I didn't think specifically about moving into this sector. It's almost kind of accidental, I guess. It's almost like as time goes on, a little bit like your story. There's a sort of gravitational pull which you find it quite hard to escape. But in my case, it was more about sort of an overlap of something that I found intellectually stimulating and sufficiently financially rewarding to count as a job that could sustain myself and my family, but that very much aligned with some values that, if you'd asked me 20 years ago, what are your values, I'm not sure what I would have said, but probably wouldn't have talked about equality of opportunity and inclusion and making a big difference in the world. And maybe the young version of myself would have been quite socially minded, but I don't really remember. So I went off to university and did an arts degree, a bit like you, in the even less useful field of philosophy. And I joke, but I actually think that doing something like that teaches you how to think and how to think morally and how to think conceptually is very, very powerful, but it's not very useful. So I got towards the end of that, living in Perth, and figured that some sort of practical version of an arts degree might apply, and ended up as a journalist at the West Australian back in the day when journalism was a big business, and the West used to offer cadetships, or kind of like an apprenticeship, and I managed to get myself onto one of those programs. But it's a pretty rough and tumble kind of life, journalism. I suspect it's a whole lot more like rough and tumble now than it was then. And I was probably a little bit too green or soft or something for it. I just didn't quite like all that level of conflict, I guess, is how I felt, even though I now really think about the value to society of an effective media. So that was an interesting journey, and I ended up popping out through a family connection into a very small company based in Fremantle, in the, of all things, microwave electronic field.
I didn't know about this one.
That's what my kids say, how many jobs have you had? I said, I've had as many careers as I've had jobs, But what was really interesting about this was that it was founded by a local inventor, and he had it as the mission of the company to be a good technology company based in Perth, Western Australia. And this was back in the 90s, right? In fact, he founded it in the 80s. So this is not, we're not talking about IT and social media and that sort of stuff. We're talking about hardcore technology, which had application in radar and telecommunications and things. But he had this global sort of aspiration, but it was built on this moral statement of being good, which it kind of really appealed to me. And I got to go to the US and Europe and in a sales kind of capacity. I knew nothing about microwave electronics, but that didn't seem to matter. And then, got married and went to live in Melbourne to do an MBA, which is a business, postgraduate business degree, and sort of did that on spec. I went over there without a job, ended up again working in the biotechnology sector. Again, no scientific basis whatsoever for working in the biotechnology sector, but was kind of in a business and commercial kind of role. And ended up coming back to Perth with 2 small children and fell really into management consulting, which I think is what happens to people who don't have a very long attention span, and you end up becoming a generalist. And I was a generalist in terms of providing business and strategy advice.
I was going to say it was strategy though, focus, wasn't it, with the consulting?
Sort of eventually, yeah. I sort of started more in the operations space, again, across multiple industries, including Silver Chain, which for those of the few people in Australia who might not have heard of that, it's a large home health care and social care organisation. And over a number of years in 2 different consulting firms, I did more and more work with Silver Chain, and was really at the point where, and this is where I think as previously not conscious values around doing things that made a difference, lined up with what looked like a really interesting space about doing healthcare differently, doing it in the home, enabling people to live well at home regardless of where they were at in their life or indeed towards the very end of their life. And the job came up in a strategy role. And as I said, when I left Silver Chain 6 years later, I joined because I was interested, and I stayed because I really cared. And it really did just become a place that I felt was doing good things. I got the opportunity to go and live in Sydney, develop Silver Chain's business in New South Wales and Queensland. It also was part of a merger with a South Australian similar organisation. So really played a role in Silver Chain doing what it did, going from doing what it did in Western Australia to doing what it did in other parts of the country. So again, it was an ambitious period of time for the organisation. It was about growth, it was about business, but it was about doing good wherever we went. Rolled the clock forward, and the opportunity to join this three-way merger that didn't yet have a name in home care, social care, community care, incorporating aged care services, mental health support work, and disability services popped up, and I was lucky enough that I got the job.
Before you got the job, what motivated you to apply? What was it that kind of grabbed you?
Yeah, I think I'd got to the point where I wanted to have a crack at being a CEO. So there is an element of wanting to do that job, and I thought a bit about what that comes from. I remember speaking to Terry Agnew, who's the CEO of the RAC in WA and has been for a number of years, about when does that kind of realisation come to you? And he said something along the lines of there just comes a point where you figure you want to have that overall responsibility for something. It's not a very complex, not even particularly deep sort of reflection. It's just that's where you get to. That was what he felt, and that's kind of where I'd got to. So that was that part of it. What kind of job was I going for? And then it was the industry that I'd come to know and understand and really feel quite passionately about. And I absolutely have a belief that community organisations who are caring and compassionate, but also business-minded and ambitious, can make a massive difference to a whole community and to the lives of many, many people. And in Chorus, there was an aligning up of a new board that had that sort of sense of momentum, a sector that was undergoing a lot of change and needed someone a bit like me with short attention span to get involved and move rapidly. And it lined up nicely with what I think I was offering. It's sometimes these things seem to happen by chance, but of course they only partially happen by chance.
There sounds like loads of opportunity there, which I guess is some of the motivation, but did you think about risk as well in taking that step?
It's a good question. I guess I did in a way. I was conscious, and I still am conscious, that we're a work in progress, and these things can go well and they can go not so well. I didn't feel like there was a massive risk. The main sort of risk was it doesn't work well and the job doesn't work out, and I'm out looking for another job. But it wasn't a big factor in my considerations. A few people have said to me before and since, wow, it's a big thing to go and have a crack at, and what did you feel about? How did you feel about it?
And not so much the CEO, but the merger. I mean, it was just a huge task to do, or to manage a number of tasks.
Yeah, but I guess you talk about motivation. It was, in a lot of ways, it's the scale of that challenge that I guess I do find motivating, and I probably I definitely carry around an underlying belief that we'll succeed. As a Chorus will achieve something special, something remarkable. But on a day-to-day basis, there's plenty of moments where you feel like the pressure's on, and you're not quite sure how something's going to work out. But talk about the workplace for you, Lou. You were part of Care Options before the merger. You sort of saw it happening, coming over the horizon at you, which probably was an interesting period of time. And now, we're in the thick of it. And I'm interested to know what you find most motivating about it.
Well, it's a really funny story, really. I don't know about funny, ha-ha, but funny, amusing, interesting. I started at Care Options in June 2016, not that long after wrapping up my MBA. That took me 3 and a bit years. So I was looking for, what I was looking for. I was looking outside the sector again, thinking, do I move out? Just fate just never made it possible for me. But interestingly, I live in Quinns Rocks, which is 30 k's north of Perth, and the role at Care Options was really based in Rockingham, about 55 k's south of Perth, so 85 kilometre difference. So I would not have applied for the job proactively, I don't think. But the CEO at the time, Sheila Cummins, got in touch with me directly and said, had I seen the job and would I be interested? And so, when someone phones you directly, you kind of think, oh, well, I'll have a conversation. Had coffee, and before I knew it, had a job. So, it's funny how you just end up in a role that I was, really pleased to be in, but I just wouldn't have necessarily put myself out there and sought it. And so that was June 2016, the end of June. And I think at our first executive meeting, there was a merger on the table.
Yeah. Sounds a bit like when I joined Silver Chain. It was literally within the first month.
Yeah, it makes you think what was going on behind the scenes. But, we'll always be positive. But I think you and I, we've both said we're quite similar in some ways. I just completely took to that. I thought that was great. It probably was helped by the fact that my role was executive manager of business development, so a merger would very much be, something I would do. And I was on a 12-month fixed-term contract, so I didn't see it as disrupting, any permanency in the role or anything like that. I just thought, oh, that's interesting. So pretty much the whole time, within weeks of being at Care Options, this merger was on the table.
But you talk about risk. I mean, there was risk for yourself. There, you didn't quite know how it was going to fold out.
No.
You didn't know whether you were going to end up with a job at the end of it or a different job.
No, which I think in hindsight was quite liberating. And, I had lots of conversations between when you started in February 2017 and this new structure, and when I moved into my current role in May. I think for me, being quite relaxed about it, but really wanting to be part of it, the merger and what we were going to do, and working with you particularly. But I wasn't, it wasn't like I was desperate to cling on.
Yeah.
And I think that was really a good place to be. I just thought, there's other options. This could be really great. But
it's kind of like when you're trying to get a boyfriend or a girlfriend, when you're not trying.
Stop
it's
looking.
you do your best work.
Absolutely, yeah. So in hindsight, that was good. And I don't think you can fake that, can you? So,
no. Well, that's sort of part of the secret of it. But what was motivating? And there's a period of uncertainty there. Would you say that was a motivating period or a demotivating period? Or
for me, it was probably motivating. I could see other people around me that may have found it demotivating, and perhaps that's how people deal with ambiguity and uncertainty. I kind of like that stuff as long as it's not threatening. I like.
It's also contextual, isn't it? As you said, you'd been there for a short period of time. You weren't necessarily looking at that moment. You knew there was a 1-year kind of contract and that was going to end. So contextually, moving on was always a possibility. Staying was always a possibility. So there's kind of a bit of lucky context that goes with that.
And I think that you said about not being there very long, that was helpful and has been helpful since, because I don't feel like I was really, part of the fabric of Care Options. So and I think that in a merger that can always be tricky if you never quite move across to the new
regime.
Yeah, you're always stuck in the old ways. That was probably quite helpful. But I was, involved in the communications working group right from the outset, and we put an awful lot of time and energy into that group, which was great. I think you can never communicate too much in a merger or anything significant that happens in business. And we started that really early, months before any announcement, and had lots of plans and also plans for if things didn't quite, if there was leaks about the merger or if things went this way or that way. We had lots of different options. So being involved in that was great. And interestingly, working with Jane Whittenham on that group, who's now our company secretary, was great. We bonded early, and I think I dropped her down to one of the sites early, and we had a mini road trip, and we still work relatively closely together. So that was really nice to build kind of that relationship.
And is that what the motivation, where motivation comes from for you generally, and perhaps now at Chorus, around those people you work with and the relationships that you form?
Yeah, definitely people. I always come back to that. I think, the people I choose to socialise with, or people you work with, it just has a huge impact on how motivated I am. I was thinking about this before, about motivation, and this is probably why I was asking you about opportunity and risk, because I think there's a real sweet spot with challenges or opportunity, in that most of us want to be challenged,
Just
but
enough.
just enough. Yeah, because if it is too hard, then there's that setting yourself up for failure. And if it's too easy, you just get bored. And I often talk to people where they just think, I just love a job that required nothing of me, and I'm like, you wouldn't, because within 5 minutes you're so bored. And I actually think that's worse.
Yeah. Well, I think jobs that are too easy or too unstimulating, I guess, can be really problematic. I can't remember ever being in a job where that was the case.
Never long enough, Dan.
No, perhaps not. But I remember someone saying to me once that if you're not terrified in the first 3 months, you'll be bored after the first year. So that's a quite extreme way of putting it. But I think that's right. It's like there is a sweet spot. It's like being in the right gear in your car. You're either undergeared or overgeared. And when you're going all right, when everything's sort of vibrating at the right sort of frequency. But that is a sweet spot. On the other extreme, when things are really hard, I think the thing that I find demotivating, and many people find demotivating, is when you can't see how things are going to improve, or you can't see where you're trying to get to. And I can remember working with a guy 10 years ago, and one of the things he said to me once has always stuck with me is that, people can deal with a lot if they can see the light on the hill. And I think when things are really hard is when you can't see the light on the hill. What we're seeing in Chorus at the moment is people working incredibly hard, and in many cases going through periods of quite a lot of personal stress with organisational change and role change and contract change and all this sort of thing. And what we're working hard on is to try and make sure that the light on the hill is visible. But it's difficult to do, and if the light on the hill isn't there, people do find that very demotivating. I personally find that very demotivating.
I think I hadn't thought about it quite like that in how it motivates, but that's certainly what we picked up on it in episode 6, talking about what people like about working at Chorus. And I think I remember saying, been in some really difficult conversations, and you can get very bogged down in the detail, but if you can look to the future and what you're trying to create or achieve, then that can really help. I suppose it's all the stuff around vision, isn't it? And linking everybody's part to that vision, and those kind of stories of people that can see how their role achieves a bigger picture. The janitor at NASA can see that he's contributing to getting man on the moon. If we can build that kind of connectivity between people, then I think the group is more than the sum of the parts.
And we're not actually putting people on the moon, but
not yet.
It's not. Yeah, that's right. It's not. It's not difficult to get people in Chorus excited about the work that we do and the outcomes that we can achieve and the difference we can make. So that is very motivating for me, and I'd like to think it's motivating for many people. It's obviously been a interesting journey the last period, Lou, since the merger was created, but even in the period leading up to that, have you got any sort of learnings maybe about yourself or about how an organisation like Chorus works that you'd think are worth sharing?
Yeah, I think being true to yourself and being honest with yourself and others, I think that links a little bit to culture, links a little bit to what I've talked about not having that facade and feeling like you need to put on a professional front. I think if you're in times of change and trickiness, for want of a better word, it's really hard to deal with that and keep up a facade. So I think how I got through the challenges of the merger and how I've had conversations with people who are really struggling right at the moment is, just go back to basics. How do you feel about this? Find safe people to talk to, find a constructive way through, don't get bogged down in argument or gossip or complaining, because that's not really helped many people. So yeah, it's pretty simple stuff, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
But it can take a lifetime to work out.
Yeah.
I think, if we can build a place where people feel there's trust there, and so it's safe to be yourself, and there's safe places to go and seek advice and things like that, then really nothing's insurmountable. And people have been through worse than
we have
here, and you have to find ways of coping and getting through.
Well, I think I share that view. I think it is simple, but it's not easy, and it's simple to say, and people have been saying for thousands of years, be true to yourself as a starting point, and be authentic with others as a starting point. And I think I agree, that's sort of one of my learnings, and definitely the first few months in the job, I had some real periods of sort of feeling pretty intense and stressed, I guess. But I do recall kind of making a bit of a decision with myself that I would just be the authentic version of myself as far as I could, and I would be honest and authentic in what I was telling people. And it wasn't that I was being dishonest before that at all, nor that I was presenting a majorly false sort of face, but the energy involved in trying to work out what the best way to say something would be, or whatever, is pretty draining. So the realization is that this is just me, this is who I am, this is what we're trying to do, this is what we're considering, whether we're changing structure or we're coming up with a new name or whatever. It's if there's nothing to hide, a lot of that challenge goes away, and that is really quite liberating. And then how I try and translate that is to say, if we can create an environment where that's how most people feel, or everybody feels, that's a fantastic workplace. You bring your whole self to work, you are your whole self, you interact with others positively and respectfully, and you talk honestly about what's going on, we can achieve just about anything, I think. And so back to the question of motivation, that's been a sort of a very motivating aspect of what we're doing. I think I'm personally motivated by the potential that we've got. I feel like we've got a great culture. We've created a brand that is interesting and clearly doing something different. We're still kind of getting our house in order in a lot of ways, but I can see that there's lots of need out in the community for people to live the life they choose, and having barriers put in front of them, and what can we do to help. And I can see that there's an opportunity to do more and to build a business which is bigger and better at enabling people to live the life they choose. So that's the light on the hill for me. It's a bit vague, but I'm just I'm strongly motivated by and believe really very strongly that we can and will do something remarkable.
I agree, and I think to reflect on that, you as CEO, you're there shining the light on the hill as well.
Just got to make sure I change the batteries every now and again.
Yeah, so that we can see where we're going. But I think you do a great job of that. I think what I wanted to say is that, for a whole organisation, and, we've got 1,000+ people involved in our organisation, staff and volunteers, they need to be guided towards that vision, and we're still trying to create some of that in developing Chorus. But I think you're building a really strong vision for people to feel like they're coming along that journey. So, I think I share that vision. There's a number of other people following. I reflect on an exercise we did at a gathering of some leaders at Chorus in late 2017, and I brought along an activity that's just like a bunch of photos. Picture this, it's called, and you can Google the set. And John Texera, one of our managers, picked a picture of a guy standing on a box at a beach with about 50 people around him. And so there's no details or context about what that is, but his description of that was, that's Dan on the box. that's all of us listening to him. Oh. It just makes me smile when I think about that. It's on some posters around the place.
Yeah. Or, maybe the box is about to collapse, or we're going to throw a few sand bundis at him. So look, the story of transformation mid-career and how work motivates you there, wrapping up our bit of a meandering conversation about our work lives, Lou, and like I said at the start, a little self-indulgent, but hopefully people found it interesting. I have learned a few things that I didn't know about you today, which has been excellent.
Likewise, microwave energy industry.
Yeah, I certainly don't hold myself out as any kind of expert. Look, it's been an interesting conversation, and you know, work is a big part of our lives, so it's worth reflecting on what motivates us. Thank you for the chat.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Chorus Voices, the podcast brought to you by Chorus. If you like our show and wanted to know more, check out our website at chorus.org.au. And please leave a review. We'd love to hear your feedback, and it helps others find us and enjoy the podcast as well. Join us next time for more inspiring stories and news from our community. Chorus, a fresh approach to community service.